Hello, I'm Fiona Ritchie.
And I'm Nik Kendrew.
We're both part of the Red Whale team.
Come with us to reignite your passion for primary care.
Welcome to the Panic Christmas Shopping Buying Primary Care Pod from Red Whale. The Primary Care Pod from Red Whale.
So grab your preferred drink of choice, or your trainers, clutch your pearls, shake your jingle bells. And let's start with the headlines. Here's what's coming up. Diagnosing diabetes. Do you know MODY from LADA? It's recently been World Diabetes Day, and we wanted to support this by sharing some Red Whale diabetes content.
PSA testing in asymptomatic men. This emotive subject has been in the news and social media over the past few weeks, and there will have been many requests for PSA testing, so keep listening to find out more.
And now it's time for our third pearl of the month and diagnosing diabetes. Now, November saw World Diabetes Day, and we wanted to support this by sharing some Red Whale diabetes content. In primary care, most people we diagnose with diabetes will have type 1 or type 2, and we probably feel relatively confident in these diagnoses. But there are other rarer types of diabetes that we should be aware of. And that was a subject of the pearl. Now, this one took me 9 minutes and 18 seconds to read, so kind of a medium length-ish, maybe a kind of a latte and an iced spice bun kind of pearl.
Oh, hold on to your glucose monitors in that case.
Yeah, maybe not the best pairing for a diabetes, but there we go. What did this one mean for you, Fee?
Well, this is the one that actually made me smile, Nick, because I used to host our Type 2 Diabetes Demystify course with Osman, which is now hosted by Hussein and Osman.
And it's a great course, both iterations. And that's where I first saw the genius game of play your carbs right, which helps us to learn about the different kinds of carbs and how good or bad they might be. I learned from that strawberries are the best fruit if you want them because they've got low carb. And cornflakes are the worst cereal because they've got the most carb. I've just ruined the course, haven't I? Oh, no.
Total shocker. Do join us for more. Yeah. No,
there
it is
more
good.
Learning points.
Actually, yeah, many more than that. Yes, all the credit should actually go to Catherine for that because it was her brainchild. But no, it's a really, really fun way to learn all about diabetes. So do have a look at that if that's of interest for you. And I remember digesting this particular information about diagnosing diabetes for the first time when preparing for that course. And suddenly I had this like light bulb moment of a few patients of yesteryear suddenly making a little bit more sense because they might have been in this more subsection. So I'm actually going to flip this around and ask you what it meant for you, Nick.
Okay. Well, this is one that was a bit of a surprise because although over 95% of the diabetes that we'll see will be type 1 or type 2, there are other types. So it's reassuring to me that we've not kind of been missing lots because it's not huge percentages, but we need to know about these other types. And yes, the diagnosis of these other types of diabetes is a matter for the specialist. But as primary care clinicians, we need to be aware of them so that we can consider them as a possibility and refer on.
Yeah. Okay. So tell us some more.
Okay, well, firstly, diabetes can be divided into polygenic or monogenic diabetes. So polygenic diabetes, as the name suggests, there are several mutations in one individual which act together, resulting in diabetes. Most type 1 and type 2 diabetes are polygenic. And then we've got monogenic diabetes, and that's the presence of a single gene defect which causes the diabetes. And there are multiple gene defects that can do this. So let's take a closer look at polygenic diabetes now. So this accounts for 96% of all diabetes, almost all of which are type 1 and type 2, and very few are LADA.
Ah, yes, LADA. Can you remind us of that or introduce us to that maybe?
Well, I certainly can. So we've got type 1 diabetes, which in basic terms presents as insulin deficiency. Then there's type 2 diabetes, which in basic terms presents as insulin resistance. And then we have LADA. Now, I was vaguely aware of this in my peripheral vision because I'm sure I've seen a few hospital letters mention it. So it's nice to sort of read a bit more about it. Now, LADA stands for latent autoimmune diabetes in adults. It's sometimes called type 1.5 diabetes, and that's how I've seen it referenced in the hospital letters that I was talking about. It's probably a subgroup of type 1 diabetes. Often patients are not overweight, so a type 1 picture, but presenting at an older age, which is the type 2 picture. It's often misdiagnosed and treated as type 2 and may initially respond to this treatment, but then develop insulin deficiency quicker than would be expected.
Yeah, that's it. So this was one of the patients where I had that light bulb moment I was talking about. So essentially that feeling of kind of square peg, round hole, and his type 2 diabetes requires more and more insulin. And we were really trying to work out what was going on and sought some help from a great diabetes team locally, and actually really ironed things out.
And that's the point, because we need their input here, especially as we would suggest that autoantibodies are only tested on the advice of the diabetes specialists. An article on LADA from Diabetes Spectrum in 2016 lists the antibodies that can be present in LADA, and you can read more about them in the Pearl. But we should note, though, that there can be some overlap of them in LADA and type 1, so presence of them is not confirmatory.
So that was polygenic diabetes. Let's take a look at monogenic diabetes now, which accounts for about 1 to 4% of all diabetes. There are 3 types. 1 which we are more likely to see, and 2 that we need to know about but are much less common. So first up is MODY, which stands for maturity onset diabetes of the young. This classically presents as type 2 picture in a younger person, but with clinical features that can vary depending on the gene defect. So some run with slightly higher sugars but never need treatment, whilst others need insulin. And most forms of MODY are autosomal dominant, and so typically several successive generations have diabetes, whereas if you compare that to type 2 diabetes, that tends to have a more sporadic picture than this. So this is where you can dust off those family tree drawing skills and start mapping out the inheritance pattern. Do you remember how to do that, Nick?
Boxes, you might need to refresh my memory.
That kind of thing? I might need to refresh myself. So importantly, people are not usually overweight, although to slightly caveat that with increasing obesity in the population, obesity may be present. So it does make that a bit more tricky for us. So that's MODY. And then we've got mitochondrial diabetes and neonatal diabetes. I'm just going to briefly tell you what these are. So mitochondrial diabetes can look like type 1 or type 2. And while there is a strong family history like MODY, this will be in the maternal line, of course, because our mitochondria come from our mothers, along with our good looks. Now, most carriers will have bilateral hearing impairment, and they require a genetic test for confirmation. So I doubt this is a diagnosis that we're going to be making ourselves in primary care, but it's definitely one to be aware of. And then also neonatal diabetes. Now, this is rare, so figures are 1 in 400,000, and it actually occurs in the first 6 to 12 months of life, despite the neonatal label. And it presents with DKA and usually misdiagnosed as type 1 diabetes. Genetic testing is going to be confirming diagnosis here, so this is all very secondary care. But we need to know that half are permanent and half are transitory, although they may recur later in life, so one to be aware of.
Yeah, and a quick word about steroid-induced diabetes as well. So steroid-induced diabetes is not a separate genetic type of diabetes. However, it is a distinct type of diabetes, and we might see that in primary care as well.
So do have a read of the Pearl to let all this sink in, and you'll find more information on the subtypes of type 2, which were described by the Lancet in 2022 as well.
If you want to know more about diabetes, then did you know that there are 21 diabetes articles on Red Whale Knowledge that you can use in consultations and for CPD? And for Red Whale Unlimited members, then join us for the Diabetes Half-Day course that we mentioned earlier, and there are a whole host of on-demand video bites to support your learning too. So here are your learning points for types of diabetes. The vast majority of diabetes we see is type 1 or 2, but there are some rare types that we need to be aware of.
Diagnosis of these types is for the specialist, but we've highlighted the things that may point them towards one diagnosis over another.
Okay, so let's pause for a few moments now, because it is time for the group hug. It is the part of the podcast where we celebrate getting through a difficult day in primary care with our best intention story. So thank you to everybody that's emailed in, and also for those of you that have texted in your stories recently. However, we do need your ongoing help to put a smile on everybody's faces. So whilst you listen to the story this month, then have a think about what your best intention story would be, and then please send it in. And our contact details are in the show notes. So let's press the right button. And this month, our best intention story is from Vina. Dear Fiona and Nik. I have a story which I'm not sure if you would be interested in for your podcast. Now, Vina, and anybody else listening, if you are thinking about sending in your story, we are always going to be interested, so please don't hesitate. So back to Vina. I am an ST3, so gearing up to spread my wings in the land of primary care. I went on a home visiting shift with the out of hours team recently, and we attended an elderly lady with a fall and back pain. We arrived and her son and daughter were there, and they said, "Mum's just popped to the loo, but take a seat and she'll be back in a moment." So I sat down and started asking some questions. After a couple of minutes, I thought, the sofa's a bit warm. Somebody must have just been sat on here before me. The warmth started to get more noticeable, and so I stood up to have a look. The black velvet sofa had an invisible puddle of urine. Now, of course, I didn't want to give the game away with my expression in any way, so I did my best everything's fine face, and I just said I needed to stretch my legs. The patient's son and daughter, they kindly asked if I wanted to sit down again. No, thank you, I said. I've been sat down a lot today. But as a good trainee, I picked up on the non-verbal cue, and when the patient came back, we directed the conversation towards incontinence as well, and so I referred her on to get the help that she needed. So, after that, I had to complete the last 2 hours of my shift with what would be termed on the Great British Bake Off as a soggy bottom. And my learning point is, and this is very good, always give the sofa a pat to check it's dry before you sit down, because you can wash your hands, but you can't wash your trousers on a shift. So, I think we've all been there, haven't we?
Oh, wow. I mean, I remember those out-of-hour shifts very vividly. I was going to say fondly, maybe not fondly, but very vividly. And yes, I remember being, when I was, I don't know, sometime in my very early training, I had a brilliant clinical fellow, I think it must have been at university actually, who said you can diagnose absolutely everything from just observing someone and their environment. And this was in hospital. So it was even, what was on the, on the table and all the stuff around the bed and everything. But that's just incredible, isn't it? I mean, well done for not losing composure as well. But yes, good learning point. You always stand up. It's good for you in many ways. And also don't accept sweets that aren't in wrappers. I think that was another
a very good learning point. Yes, yes. And also great for Vina to see the positive in that. So thank you for sharing your story, Vina.
That is fantastic. It does sometimes. I mean, Nick, we have had a few of these stories where people have ended up with wardrobe malfunctions, haven't we? So maybe there's something about having spare clothes available. Because, of course, back in the hospital days, you could go and jump into a pair of scrubs, couldn't you?
Yeah.
But maybe there's something there. Maybe that's something I need to put on my action plan.
In fact, I have a secret. I've got a secret drawer at work, won't be secret anymore, where I have a set of scrubs.
No. Oh, good.
Left over from the pandemic.
It's a good idea.
All clean, ready for me if ever I need them. Better just check they're still there, otherwise it'll be having a very smug face.
Someone else has been off with your scrubs.
Exactly. So, you've got
Fiona. Thanks for sharing that vulnerable story, but we all get it.
Exactly. You've got the calendar there, haven't you?
I do, yes. Well, of course, we are looking forward to January. It's 2025. Lots of exciting things on the horizon in the new year. We've got some exciting things coming up. So Hussein is hosting a lifestyle course on the 17th. some of you folk who are tuning in from Wiltshire may be joining Osman and Steve for a cancer update. There's Study Day lives going on across the board. And Susan and I will be hosting an urgent care course digitally on the 31st. So please do come and join us if you are available.
So that's the 31st of January for the urgent care course. Sign up now and you can see Fee and Susan presenting that.
You can see my actual face.
Yes, exactly. Or, they could just listen.
And no jingle bells. Yeah, they could just listen if that's more palatable. Yeah. So also, Nick, our new trainee package has been really popular, hasn't it?
Yes. So the GP Trainee Essential Support Package. So this is exclusively available to GPST MDU members and affiliates. So if you are one of those and it's free, it's worth £165 and it's designed to build your knowledge and confidence and help you pass your exams. And so what's included, I hear you ask? Well, it's really helpful because it's got Redwell Knowledge Access, which is over 900 written resources to support you during consultations and also with your CPD. Also, the Top AKT Topics Digital Handbook, which covers areas that trainees struggle with the most, and webinars throughout the training year to support you with your exam preparation. So if you click on to the link, then you can sign up for that.
Please note that the package is completely free for MDU affiliate and GPST members, but MDU GPST membership itself does carry a charge to sign up. Our GP Trainee Essentials package is a free benefit of affiliate and GPST MDU membership.
Thank you very much. And so now it's time for our fourth and final pearl of the month and PSA testing in asymptomatic men. Now, this is a very long pearl. It's a bumper pearl and it took me forever to read. So in fact, it will remain classified how long it actually took me to read. But we are going to extract 3 learning areas to discuss today. And you can find lots more information in the written article. So we're going to discuss, why don't we have a screening program? Who are the men with additional risk factors? And what do we do with them? And also, what's the future of prostate cancer screening? So what does this mean for you, Fee?
Oh, well, it always gets me when these things happen, doesn't it? So we are talking about this because Sir Chris Hoy announced that he's got terminal prostate cancer. And they're really sad moments. And I have utmost respect for those people like him who bring it to the kind of public and policy arena and go about trying to bring about change. Of course, we had Bill Turnbull, who was a news presenter and radio DJ who had prostate cancer and died in 2022. And actually, as a result of his work and him talking about it, we saw urological cancer referrals go up by a whopping 17% in 2023. And at Redwell, we've been covering PSA for what feels like a long time now, kind of the updates, but also trying to tease out why it's so difficult. It's something that many of us within Redwell find tricky, and we know it's something that you find tricky too. So Chris Hoy's recent interview with the BBC saw him recommending or asking the question why people with a strong family history should go to see their GP for a PSA test. And he was quoted as saying, "To me, it seems a no-brainer. Why would they not reduce the age," he means for testing, bring the age down and allow more men to go in and get a blood test? And of course, this is the rock and the hard place that we find ourselves in, because from the outside, it really seems like a simple blood test, but it's the implications of that test and the more invasive tests as part of that pathway that may arise as a result. And Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, has said that this is a powerful argument, and so he is instructing the NHS to look at changing the age for testing, so do keep an eye out for that. And of course, we as clinicians on the ground, we just want people to get the help they need and pick abnormalities up as soon as possible, but whilst also sort of managing that kind of risk-benefit balance. So, Nick, how do we navigate this on the ground?
Well, it's really interesting to hear you talk about that, Fee, because it just goes to show as well that we kind of need to have our finger on the pulse when we're working in primary care, because these things do happen quite often in the media. And I have to say that this is now the 3rd time. So Stephen Fry, Bill Turnbull, as you said, and Chris Hoy, all in recent years. And all of them coming from, understandably, the best place. They're trying to recommend people getting PSA testing because they want to help people. And I completely understand where they're coming from. Yes. But on all those occasions, I've been back to check the guidelines to see if something has changed. Is there something I'd missed? You then get people phoning up wanting the test, and you need to kind of know all about it. So hopefully this is a timely resource that we can share with everybody, so that you're there and you're able to answer the questions when people come to you and ask about having
to be
a
well
PSA
equipped,
test.
isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if we go into the more detail about it, the first thing to consider is where we are right now. So we're going to be looking at what the various groups say. So those are the UK National Screening Committee, Public Health England's Prostate Cancer Risk Management Programme. So we're going to refer to them as the PCRMP, and also evidence from journals such as the BMJ and the BJGP. So why don't we have a screening program? And it's important to say from the offset that a screening program is for people who are asymptomatic for any of the cancers that you're screening for. So that's what we're talking about. People who've got symptoms, it's a different kettle of fish. So we're talking here about a screening program for asymptomatic people. Now, the National Screening Committee, they last reviewed all the available evidence on this in 2020, and they concluded that screening is not currently recommended for this condition, being prostate cancer. This was for the following reasons. The PSA test is not accurate enough to detect the prostate cancers that need treatment, and it can miss some cancers. It remains unclear at this time whether MRI plus or minus PSA is accurate enough to make sufficient difference to change the recommendation. There is no single treatment for early prostate cancer that's been demonstrated to be superior, and each available treatment has to be weighed against its side effects. It's unclear how PSA impacts on deaths due to prostate cancer, and it's not been shown to have an impact on all-cause mortality. And a PSA-based screening program could cause harm to men, as some would be diagnosed with a cancer which would never become clinically significant during their lives. Now, men can request a PSA test if they wish, but they should be fully counselled regarding the pros and cons of the test. It may be easy to just tick the PSA box on a blood form, but doing this without adequate explanation is not in any of our patients' best interests. As part of the counselling, we may want to consider and discuss additional risk factors.
So let's think about Sir Chris's request about those with a strong family history getting a test and at a younger age. So who is at additional risk? Well, those with a family history of prostate cancer, men of black ethnic origin. So in terms of figures here, the lifetime risk is 1 in 4 for men of black ethnicity compared to 1 in 8 for white men and 1 in 12 for Asian men. And those men with lower socioeconomic status. And I have to say, Nick, that was a learning point for me. So a clinical consensus published in the BJGP in August 2024 deviated from the current guidance, and it suggested that, as clinicians, we should be doing 2 things. Number 1, we should aim to increase awareness of prostate cancer in those at risk, but it caveats that we shouldn't be insisting that they all have a PSA. And 2, we should proactively raise prostate cancer risk with men who are over 45 if deemed at the highest risk. Now, the National Screening Committee and the PCRMP do not advocate a different approach to screening for these groups, but the PCRMP does advocate that clinical discretion can be used in deciding whether to test men under the age of 50 years who we may consider to be at higher risk. So this is what Chris Hoy is raising here. Currently, it is left to our clinical discretion, whereas he'd like this to be mandated.
Okay, but is there evidence for screening in those within a high-risk ethnic group?
No, not yet. So the National Screening Committee's systematic review and meta-analysis couldn't answer the question of whether screening was of more benefit in ethnicities at high risk. The BMJ rapid recommendation did not advocate a different approach to screening in these groups either. So let's think about the impact of family history on risk. We know that 5 to 10% of prostate cancers are associated with genetic mutations. And in those with genetic mutations, onset is often earlier. So we're looking at an onset at 50 years and under. Men who develop prostate cancer at an earlier age are more likely to die from it, even when compared with older men at a similar stage of disease. And there's a helpful table in the Pearl which demonstrates the impact of family history on risk, so do take a look at that. We may want to seek advice from clinical genetics and weigh this information in the balance when making decisions about PSA testing with men. So Nick, can you tell us about BRCA and where this all fits in?
Yeah, so men with the BRCA gene are at increased risk of prostate, breast and pancreatic cancer. Men and women are equally likely to inherit and pass on the BRCA genes, which are autosomal dominant. It's therefore important that we take family histories for male and female family members and consider the possibility of a BRCA mutation in men with prostate cancer at a young age or in men with aggressive or multiple prostate cancers. But do men who carry the BRCA gene have additional clinical needs? Now, this was the subject of a useful BMJ practice pointer from 2021, and the key messages are that all men with suspected or confirmed BRCA should have had a clinical genetics assessment and care plan formulated. Men with BRCA genes have an increased risk of breast cancer and should be breast aware. They also have an increased risk of prostate and pancreatic cancer. Men with BRCA2 and possibly also BRCA1 have an increased risk of developing aggressive prostate cancer. The absolute risk is 27% by the age of 75 years. It's not yet known whether PSA screening reduces mortality for these men. There's no UK guidance on whether these men should be offered PSA screening, but the European Association of Urology recommends offering PSA screening to men with BRCA2 from the age of 40 years. It doesn't specify, though, at what interval. The impact study is currently in progress to evaluate whether this is a useful strategy. Now, all this information will feed into our shared decision-making conversations when a man asks for a test. But what about the future of prostate cancer screening? Well, every year, over 44,000 men are diagnosed with prostate cancer and more than 10,000 men die from prostate cancer, and that's from Prostate Cancer UK, accessed in July 24. Now, there is an understandable push for a viable, effective and safe screening program, as we were talking right at the beginning of the Pearl. And if the PSA by itself isn't viable as a screening tool, how about PSA plus something else, Fee?
Yes, of course, this is what a lot of people are thinking and have been discussing for a while, but we're not there yet. But let's go through what we do know. So first up, PSA and multiparametric MRI. So firstly, what is multiparametric MRI? Well, if you don't know, or if you need a reminder, then put simply, it's a fancy MRI that combines different MRI techniques. And of course, that's interesting. But the reason that we as primary care clinicians care is because it's a non-invasive test that will allow detection of cancers and allow stratification. Now, what we have to remember is that currently, if you have a positive PSA, then you are referred and most likely offered a biopsy first, which of course is invasive and comes with its own side effects. So this is sometimes where we are torn because we don't want to cause harm. According to the Prostate Cancer UK data, which was published in February 23, multiparametric MRI can now be accessed across 72% of the UK, which was much more than I thought. And I wonder where we are with that now, Nick, to be honest. I don't know if everyone listening out there, perhaps you could text us and let us know what you're doing in your areas and whether you've got access, because I didn't think it was that widespread.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are going to text in, then all you have to do is if you look on the platform that you're listening on your phone, or however you're listening, it will say, send a text message, and you can send us a text message to the show and it will give us all that information. And texts are charged at your standard network rate. And if you have a plan which gives you free text, then it's included in that as well.
Oh, good. Well, thank you. But no, I'd be interested to know, because of course this has sparked debate as to whether a combined strategy of PSA and multiparametric MRI as a two-phase screen is now an option that should be formally evaluated for asymptomatic men. And of course, the aim would be to reduce the detection of clinically insignificant prostate cancer. So those cases where there's a low risk of death or metastases, but where diagnosis still maybe will cause some emotional and psychological distress, whilst increasing the detection of clinically significant tumours. So those where diagnosis at an earlier stage is likely to have a significant effect on that 5-year survival.
And have we got any evidence for this?
Yeah, so a Swedish randomised study called the Göteborg 2 trial, which was published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 22, evaluated whether such a screening algorithm could be effective. And so just under 18,000 men participated in annual PSA testing, and those with a PSA of 3 nanograms per mil or more were offered a multiparametric MRI and then randomised to either the reference group, which had a targeted biopsy of any suspicious areas on the multiparametric MRI, and they also received a systemic prostate biopsy, regardless of the MRI results. Sounds a bit sore. And then there was the experimental group, which only had targeted biopsies of any abnormalities on MRI. And men in this group were offered a systemic biopsy if their PSA was higher, so if it was over 10. And the study showed that in men with suspicious findings on multiparametric MRI, performing targeted biopsies alone reduced overdiagnosis by 50%, and that was by reducing the diagnosis of clinically insignificant tumours. However, this was at a cost of a delay in the diagnosis of intermediate risk prostate cancers in a small proportion of patients. And a small spanner in the works, the European Urology Open Science paper published in 2022 that a possible additional complication with this strategy is that tumours defined as clinically insignificant on current multiparametric MRI criteria may actually have a greater likelihood of progressing than those found at biopsy in men who have not had a multiparametric MRI.
And of course, lots of us have heard about multiparametric MRI plus PSA, and that's being looked into. But what about PSA plus several other tests? Well, another Nordic research team, this time from Finland, published some interim findings from its ProScreen study, and that was in JAMA from 2024. While the primary outcome is prostate cancer mortality at 10 and 15 years follow-up, interim findings suggested some potential benefit to screening. In this study, over 60,000 men aged 50 to 64 were randomised to either screening with PSA or the control group. Now, the control group got usual medical care. Screening with PSA was slightly different. So if the PSA was 3 or more, they underwent further blood testing. And this was total PSA, free PSA, intact PSA, and human kallikrein 2. Which, of course, most of those are not available in primary care at all at the moment.
Certainly not where I work.
Exactly. So this may be coming in the future. So this data was used to produce a risk score. If the risk score was above a threshold, then they were sent for multiparametric MRI. If the MRI was graded as high risk with a PRAD score of more than 2, they were offered a targeted biopsy. And you can see our article on Redwell Knowledge on prostate cancer diagnosis if you want more information on multiparametric MRI and the PRAD score. Now, what the study reports is that versus the control group, one more high-grade prostate cancer was diagnosed per 196 men screened, and one more low-grade cancer was diagnosed per 909 men screened. However, it's too early to say what impact this might have on mortality, and the screening process was quite involved, as you've heard from what we've just talked about. Now, importantly, there was also no data provided on harms. And harms is something we keep coming back to when we're talking about screening for prostate cancer. It's likely that the EU's planned prostate screening programme, which is looking to roll out in the next few years, will follow this multi-stage approach. And that's from the Council recommendation of the 9th of December 2022 on strengthening prevention through early detection.
And the next option is PSA plus biomarkers plus genetic markers plus clinical data, which almost sounds a bit crazy. But the reason that we're going to tell you about this is because it's something that NICE have spoken about, but it's something that's happening in the private sector. So we might need to be aware of it in case patients come in and ask us. So in August 2022, NICE brought out a briefing document on Stockholm 3, which is a technology designed to, in inverted commas, screen for prostate cancer in males aged 45 to 74 years. And that's NICE's MIB 303 publication. In fact, it isn't really a screening test. Instead, it's designed to be used either as an additional test in men with a PSA of 1.5 nanograms per mil or more, or possibly as a pre-MRI triage tool in secondary care in individuals referred with an elevated PSA. Now, this technology is already being used in private practices in the UK. So as I said, it might be something where patients come to seek our opinion, in which case what you need to hold in your head is that a result of 11% or more is considered significant. So about the test combines biomarkers, genetic markers and clinical data to generate a risk score. And you can have a look at those in the Pearl. In terms of cost, well, unsurprisingly, it's substantially more expensive than a PSA test. And what are we looking at? Well, it's about £350 excluding VAT per test compared to our £27.75 for PSA test in primary care. And the studies that were included in this review suggested that Stockholm 3, when combined with an MRI targeted biopsy, reduced overdetection without missing clinically significant prostate cancers. And the subsequent reduction in MRIs and biopsies made it cost effective. So that sounds quite promising. And if you want to read further about the evidence, then do have a look at the Pearl, where it will signpost to a few different sources. The trials show that the Stockholm 3 appears to have validity in Central European populations and African American, Black, White, Hispanic, Latino and Asian males in the US. So that's a good thing, isn't it, for broad populations and applying it to different people from different backgrounds. And combined with systemic biopsy in areas without access to a multiparametric MRI, it offers a pickup of clinically significant prostate cancer comparable to MRI targeted biopsies based on PSA levels. So something to keep an eye out for.
Absolutely. So let's pull all that together now. And so let's create a summary for all of that. So a multimodal approach based on PSA plus other metrics sounds promising, but we're still some way off a screening program being a reality in the NHS. The planned Transform trial, which is using MRI and blood testing to trial prostate screening, may answer some important questions, but recruitment has only just begun and it's due to start next year or in 2025 if you're listening in the future. The bottom line is that this is a very difficult situation, even when we know the evidence. Once a man comes in and he's primed to ask for what is basically some screening, we need the results of Transform and ideally a more balanced dialogue, because understandably this is such an emotive topic. Thankfully, if you'd like help with the more balanced dialogue, then Margaret McCartney has been leading the way on X, the social media platform, which used to be called Twitter. And we'll put a link to the BMJ article, which is much needed and very helpful to all of us. So here are your learning points for PSA testing in asymptomatic men. Family history and black ethnicity increase the absolute risk of developing prostate cancer, but there is an absence of evidence as to how this information should influence screening.
The National Screening Committee does not recommend population-wide PSA screening, but through the Prostate Cancer Risk Management Programme allows males aged 50 years and over to make an informed choice to have a PSA test.
As with so many things, shared decision-making is key. Now, if you are hankering after a Red Whale Knowledge subscription, then we're offering a 10% discount on Red Whale Knowledge for our fabulous Red Whale pod members. So how do you become a member, I hear you ask? Well, if you are listening to us right now, then you are part of our pod, so welcome. All you have to do is go to redwhale.co.uk, put Red Whale Knowledge in your basket and enter the code RedWhalePod to get 10% off. And here's a small print. The discount is only for this product and won't work on anything else. And please also note that this voucher code is all one word and all lowercase, RedWhalePod.
If you've enjoyed listening, then please give us a 5-star rating on whichever platform you use. It only takes a few seconds of your time and we'd really appreciate it. If you can spare a little more time, then please leave us a nice review too. Because of the way the algorithms work in the podcasting world, it means that other people just like you can discover us and learn something too.
Exactly. And of course, putting algorithms to the side, there is no greater recommendation than a word of mouth recommendation. So if you've got some value from listening to the podcast today, then don't keep it a secret. Please tell everybody that you know who might also benefit from listening. All the resources that you need are in the show notes and all the links are in the show description on your preferred podcast platform.
You can also find us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn and X. If you want us to see something about the podcast, then please use the hashtag RedWhalePod.
And the other thing that you can do if you click on the link in the bio is to leave us a voice message telling us about anything that you found helpful or would like us to go over.
You can also email us. Our address is podcast@red-whale.co.uk. Until next time, I'm Fiona Ritchie.
And I'm Nik Kendrew.
Remember to keep Redwell Knowledge open on your desktop at work, so we're with you when you need that bit of extra information or reassurance.
Take care and look after yourself. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.